Hey there, folks, and welcome back to Boss Economics World, the only channel on the internet that serves you the cold, hard, unpasteurized truth about the global economy, while everyone else is still trying to sell you the sugar-coated yogurt. Today, my friends, we're diving headfirst into a story that's got more layers than a bankrupt onion, and it smells just as bad when you start peeling it back. The date is September 6, 2025. The headlines are screaming, and the White House is scrambling. The big, beautiful American manufacturing renaissance promised to us with all the pomp and circumstance of a 4th of July parade seems to have gotten lost on its way to the party. The latest numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics just dropped, and they landed with the grace of a lead balloon. Manufacturing payrolls? Down. For the fourth straight month. 12,000 jobs vanished in August alone. Zoom out to the past year, and nearly 80,000 factory jobs have evaporated into thin air. That's the longest losing streak since the great unpleasantness of 2020. Now, this isn't just a blip. It's a trend. And it's a profoundly awkward one for an administration that staked its entire economic reputation on the glorious return of American industry. Remember the rallies? Remember the promises? America will be a manufacturing nation once again. It was a fantastic soundbite. It looked great on a hat. But as we're discovering in late 2025, turning a slogan into a sustainable economic reality is a bit like trying to build a spaceship with a glue stick and good intentions. So, let's do what we do best here at Boss Economics World. Let's get out our economic scalpels, cut past the political talking points, and dissect what's really going on. We'll go from the point, these dismal job numbers, to the surface, and then deep into the tectonic plates of the global economy that are causing these tremors. First, the point. The data is undeniable. The Institute for Supply Management, which is about as neutral a referee as you can get in this game, has been waving a red flag since March. Their index shows manufacturing activity has been contracting for half a year. To put that in perspective, the ISM's own committee chair, Susan Spence, delivered the gut punch of a quote, 69% of manufacturing GDP is in contraction. Let me repeat that. 69%. That's not a crack in the foundation, that's a sinkhole opening up in the living room. The administration's explanation? Well, it's a classic. Top economic advisor Kevin Hassett went on Fox News and told us all not to worry. He said there's a little bit of a lull, a little bit of a pause, because companies are busy building all these fantastic new factories. He says the jobs will surely come. This, my friends, is what we in the business call the jam tomorrow theory of economics. It's the promise of a feast while your stomach is rumbling today. They point to hundreds of billions in pledges from giants like Apple, Ford, and AbbVie. And yes, those pledges are real. We've seen a surge in factory construction since the passage of the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act back in 2022 and 2023. Intel is building massive fabs in Ohio, TSMC in Arizona, and a whole battery belt is rising across the Southeast. But here's the crucial distinction they hope you'll miss. A construction job putting up steel beams is not the same as a permanent, high-skilled manufacturing job running the robotics inside. The White House is showing you the shiny seed catalog and telling you to admire the beautiful tomatoes, while conveniently ignoring the fact that the ground is frozen and the seeds haven't even been planted yet. Pledges are not payrolls. Concrete being poured is not chips being produced. And right now, the payrolls are shrinking. So, why the disconnect? Why are existing factories laying people off while we hear promises of new ones? This brings us to the surface layer of our analysis, the trade policy. The core of the Trump economic doctrine has always been the tariff, the big, beautiful wall of taxes on imported goods, designed to make American products more competitive. The logic is simple, almost primal: if their stuff costs more, people will buy our stuff. But the global economy, my friends, is not a simple machine. It's a breathtakingly complex ecosystem. And throwing a tariff into it is like throwing a boulder into a Swiss watch. You might stop one gear, but you'll break 100 others in the process. What we've been witnessing since the trade wars reignited is the tariff boomerang. First, retaliation. This is the most obvious effect. When the US slaps tariffs on Chinese steel, European cars, or Vietnamese furniture, they don't just say thank you, sir, may I have another? They retaliate. They hit back at iconic American products, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, Kentucky bourbon, and most importantly, our agricultural goods. This directly hurts American exporters, forcing them to lay off workers. Second, input costs. This is the more insidious, hidden cost. A huge number of American manufacturers don't just compete with foreign goods, they rely on them. They import specialized components, raw materials, and microchips to assemble their final products here in the USA. For example, a Ford F-150, the most American of vehicles, contains thousands of parts sourced from around the globe. When you slap a tariff on those inputs, you don't punish China, you punish Ford. You increase their cost of production, making them less competitive on the global stage and forcing them to either eat the cost or pass it on to consumers. The ISM report explicitly cites tariff uncertainty as a primary reason for weak demand. This isn't a guess, it's what purchasing managers are saying is crippling their businesses. This uncertainty acts as a massive, invisible tax on the entire economy. A CEO can't plan a 5-year investment when they don't know if their core component costs will swing by 25% based on a single tweet. So what do? They wait. They pause hiring. They delay expansion. They sit on their hands. This is the low hiring, low firing environment the broader jobs report alludes to. It's economic paralysis, induced by unpredictable policy. Now, let's go deeper. Let's assume the White House is right. Let's say all these new factories get built and come online. Will this bring back the 1960s era manufacturing boom? Absolutely not. And this is the great, unspoken truth of the manufacturing renaissance. The promise is a nostalgic illusion. We are not reshoring the jobs of the past, we are onshoring the automation of the future. The factory that Apple might build in 2026 will not look like the factory that Zenith built in 1976. The new Tesla gigafactories or Intel's fabs are monuments of capital-intensive, not labor-intensive, production. They are filled with robotics, AI-driven quality control, and a handful of highly skilled engineers and technicians in clean suits to oversee the process. A 2023 study by MIT showed that for every one industrial robot introduced per 1,000 workers, up to 6.2 jobs were eliminated and wages were depressed. And the robot density is only increasing. South Korea has over 1,000 industrial robots per 10,000 employees. Germany and Japan are not far behind. The US is still catching up, but every new factory built is a leapfrog into this lights-out manufacturing reality. The classic, tragic case study is Foxconn in Wisconsin. In 2017, it was hailed as the eighth wonder of the world, a $10 billion investment promising 13,000 jobs. What happened? After years of scaled-back plans and broken promises, the project is a shadow of its former self, employing only a tiny fraction of the promised workforce. The lesson is brutal. A multi-billion-dollar investment pledge in 2025 does not translate to tens of thousands of middle-class assembly line jobs. It translates to a few thousand construction jobs and a few hundred permanent, PhD-level engineering positions. So when we see these 80,000 legacy manufacturing jobs disappearing, they are not being temporarily paused to be replaced by 80,000 new, similar jobs. They are being permanently replaced by a much smaller number of much higher-skilled jobs, and a whole lot of capital equipment. The second deep structural issue is the fundamental misunderstanding of the global supply chain. Politicians talk about it as if it's a set of Lego bricks that can be disassembled and reassembled at will. We'll just stop buying from China and make it here. This is economic fantasy. The modern supply chain isn't a simple chain, it's a neural network. It's a web of specialization built up over 40 years of brutal, hyper-efficient optimization. Vietnam might do final assembly, but it gets its microchips from Taiwan, which uses manufacturing equipment from the Netherlands, which is designed with software from California, all built with raw materials mined in Australia and Chile. You cannot simply reshore this network. The cost is astronomical and the timeline is a decade, not a presidential term. The CHIPS Act is a perfect example. The US government is pumping over $52 billion in subsidies into rebuilding the domestic semiconductor industry. And that is just a down payment. Boston Consulting Group estimated in 2021 that achieving full semiconductor self-sufficiency would require at least $1 trillion in upfront investment and would raise the cost of chips by 35% to 65%, a permanent tax on every car, phone, and computer sold in America. What's happening instead is not true reshoring, but supply chain redirection or friendshoring. Companies, spooked by the US-China trade war, are moving final assembly to places like Mexico, Vietnam, and India to circumvent tariffs. This is often called the whack-a-mole problem. You tariff Chinese goods, and suddenly US imports from Mexico skyrocket, as Chinese components are shipped there for final assembly before being sent to the US. It doesn't bring jobs back to Ohio, it just sends them on a more scenic route through Monterrey. Mexico, in fact, surpassed China as the top US trading partner in 2023 for this very reason. The jobs didn't come home, they just moved next door. Finally, let's talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room that no one in Washington wants to acknowledge, the US dollar. For an American manufacturer trying to export goods, the single biggest variable outside their control is the exchange rate. And for the better part of the last decade, the US has had a remarkably strong dollar. This is a result of higher relative interest rates set by the Federal Reserve to combat inflation, and the dollar's status as the world's primary reserve currency, a safe haven in times of global turmoil. While a strong dollar is great for American tourists heading to Europe, it is a dagger to the heart of American manufacturing. It makes every Ford truck, every Boeing jet, and every bushel of Iowa soybeans more expensive for foreign buyers. Simultaneously, it makes every imported BMW, Samsung phone, and piece of French cheese cheaper for Americans. It creates a massive, constant, structural headwind that tariffs can barely begin to counteract. This is the fundamental contradiction of American economic policy. The Treasury and the Fed want a strong, stable dollar to maintain global financial dominance and control inflation. The White House, at the same time, wants a manufacturing export boom. You cannot, my friends, have both at the same time. It's a classic case of trying to ride two horses with one backside. And the laws of economic gravity always win. So, when we look at these depressing manufacturing job numbers in September 2025, we're not just seeing the result of a few bad policy choices. We are seeing the collision of 20th century political rhetoric with 21st century economic reality. The promise was to turn back the clock to a golden age of American industry. But that clock was powered by a post-World War II world with no industrial competitors, a different technological paradigm, and a vastly different global financial system. The policies of tariffs and protectionism are a desperate attempt to build a wall against the tide of globalization and automation. But that tide is governed by forces far more powerful than any politician: technological progress, the ruthless logic of capital efficiency, and the inescapable interconnectedness of the modern world. The 80,000 lost jobs aren't just a lull. They are a signal. They are the ghosts in the machine, telling us that the nature of work, production, and value itself has changed. The challenge isn't to bring the old jobs back, that's impossible. The challenge is to prepare our workforce for the new jobs that are being created and to build an economic safety net for those who are being left behind by this tectonic shift. But that's a complex, difficult, and honest conversation. It's much easier to sell the simple, satisfying, and ultimately hollow promise of turning back time. And for now, the price of that promise is being paid on the factory floors of America. Host, that's all the time we have for today on Boss Economics World. What do you think? Is this a temporary blip, or a sign of a deeper structural rot? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to keep getting the real, unvarnished story behind the headlines, do me a favor, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive. Until next time, stay critical, stay informed, and remember, if an economic promise sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Take care.